people do judge a book by its cover.
People used to talk about competition increasing. I think the opposite. Dominance is increasing in business, in niches, and in sectors, and it's all about dominance.
99% is good luck, and the remaining 1% is bloody good luck.
Most dominant brands are the ones that spend the least on advertising and marketing.
An effective lie is one that stays as close to the truth as possible.
My third insight that the secret to life, success, and everything on earth is to be remark-worthy. That's what creates big businesses, being remark-worthy.
The reality is that we are living in a world where it's so difficult to tell a story. More importantly, we are living in a world of declining attention spans. So, for example, a recent study, Mahesh, you would probably be aware of this. They did a study in bookshops, and they found that the average buyer in a bookstore spends 8 seconds on the front cover and 15 seconds on the back cover before he or she decides to pick up a book. That's 23 seconds. In 23 seconds, it's decided as to whether that book will go to the cash register or not. So the point is, how are you going to get noticed? And how is that decision going to be made as to whether you are worth reading and buying? Given that sort of declining attention span, to my mind, those publishers who say that, listen, the book cover is not important. Ultimately, good writing will sell. No, that's a lie. That's a blatant lie. And frankly speaking, the statistics seem to indicate that. In the year 2000, when they looked at the human attention span, they found that the average human attention span was about 12 seconds. By 2013, that had declined to 8 seconds. And as of today, I think the goldfish has a 9-second attention span, which means that we writers should start writing for goldfish. I say that, listen, write when you're drunk, edit when you're sober, do it whatever way you want. Just remember that actually selling that book is the hangover.
I kind of grew up in this world that believed that competition is increasing, right? And which means, obviously, logically, if you follow it, if competition increases, it means all the big companies must be closely bunched up close to each other. But something strange has happened lately, right? If I take the modern equivalents of these companies. So in soft drinks, there's Coke and Pepsi neck and neck, and there's like Sprite and 7-Up and everything else. But if I take the modern equivalent of brands that have grown up in the digital era, one brand in the energy drinks space, Red Bull has 49% market share. Instead of cars, where they're like 8, 19, 20, 20.5%, if I take luxury electric cars, one brand, Tesla, has 99.2% market share. If I take video, YouTube has 90% market share, to the point where it's crazy, right? We can name 10 India pharmaceutical companies. I bet you can't name the number 2 video platform after YouTube. You can't name it. Globally, we can name 10 India pharma companies. You can't name the number 3 search engine in the world. Because number 1 is Google with 91% market share. Number 2 is Bing with 4%, and you can't name number 3. You can't. So essentially, we used to grow up in a world where it was normally believed that, toothpaste mein Ciba ka hoga, Bina ka hoga, Colgate hoga. Essentially, maybe because of this declining attention span or the breadth of product range, in any category, we remember 1 or 2 names. So today, you have got to be number 1, or you got to be number 2, or you don't exist.
In 2003, I started writing that first book of mine. It was called The Rosabal Line. And by 2005, I had actually completed that manuscript, not having written anything before that. In fact, Mahesh knows me from a different avatar.
Absolutely.
As a businessman, more than as a writer. One evening, my father had this wonderful Punjabi friend, and he used to come and enjoy a patiala peg with my dad. For those who are uninitiated, a patiala peg is 3 fingers. And so they were sitting.
Vertically. Vertically.
Vertically. So they were sitting and enjoying their drink. And this gentleman said, Beta, what's the matter? You're looking so upset. I said, well, the entire world has already rejected me. So he said, kya problem hai? Ek do aur ko apply kar lo. Almost like it will get done. So I said, but there is no publisher left who wishes to review my work. So he said, Beta, just remember one thing in life, 99% is about good luck. So I said, but uncle, the 1%, what is that 1%? It must be time management, networking, hard work, talent. He said, nothing doing. 1%, that's called bloody good luck. And I don't know, this stuck with me. I said, my God, here is a man who's attributing almost everything to this factor that we call luck. When I started writing that first book, I spoke to a friend who was already a writer, and I said, I have no training in writing, so do you have any suggestions? And she turned around and told me, Ashwin, it was the great novelist Somerset Maugham who said that there are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. So that's precisely where you are, and that's precisely where every other writer is. And that defining line between success and failure, that defining line is so difficult to predict. And that's precisely what novel writing is all about.
I'm an advertising and marketing man. I started, at the age of 17 writing ads. And the really interesting thing I found among all these brands is that they've never advertised, right? Google doesn't advertise, Zara doesn't advertise, Red Bull doesn't advertise, Starbucks doesn't advertise, Twitter doesn't advertise, WhatsApp doesn't advertise, Gmail doesn't advertise, Facebook doesn't advertise. Not one leading brand, in the world today, it's the losers who advertise and the winners who don't. So this actually blew me away because I'd say, I grew up believing that you've got to spend lots of money to advertise and win. And increasingly, the winners in every sector are the ones who spend nothing. So I said, that's really interesting. Let me try it with my own companies. So one of my companies was Red Bus. Some of you may have heard it. It's a bus ticketing company. Every year, Funny would come to me and sit at the board and say, boss, we need so much money to advertise. I'd make it 0. I'd say, go back. And he had no choice but to improve his product. And finally, in the end, we sold the company for, when it was doing revenues worth about 900 crores. We built a middle-class e-commerce, 500 rupee per transaction company on no advertising. So you look at it, and there is something really there to say where the world's biggest brands, and these are all billion-dollar brands we're talking about, are the ones that may have marketed but never advertised.
I was at a press conference a couple of months ago, and one of the gentlemen out there, he asked me, he said, Ashwin, you are a bania businessman, and suddenly one day you decided to start writing. And what is your qualification for writing? So I said, during my growing up years, my mother used to tell me that I was a bloody good liar. And I could lie with a straight face. And I said, that is precisely the qualification that I bring to the table, that I can tell a lie, which is what all fiction writers have to do. So having said that, it also opened up a new line of inquiry in terms of the sort of books that I would be writing. And that's the reason I wanted to throw this in to the mix. So I thought, wouldn't it be fascinating if you could actually craft writing which sounds so real? I've always loved fiction that sounded almost factual. And given the fact that Mr. Goswami was here, we've also now got used to the fact that on our news we have fact that sounds like fiction. There are many news channels which actually have soundtracks. So the point is there is a blurring of that distinction between fact and fiction. The way I like to think about it is that you have myth on one hand and you have history on the other. And maybe if you can bring them closer together and find that overlap zone, then that myth and history becomes a mystery. And that's precisely what I try and do.
Having started by saying, A, dominance exists and can be got. You can be 80% dominant. B, you can do it without spending any money on advertising. I said, so it comes to 3. So what's the secret of this? And the really interesting broad thing, in some ways, it's kind of become an interesting thing to do in life is, so how do you hear about, why is it that you know Zara? Why is it you know Red Bull? Why is it you know Google? Why is it you know Facebook? And why is it that you know Twitter? And the answer to each one of this is because somebody told you. Why did somebody tell you? Somebody told you because they found it really interesting and they thought that they'd gain some goodwill from you by telling you, right? Whether it was a journalist or whether it was more likely just somebody else who said, yeah, you come on WhatsApp, yeah, I'm downloading it, you have to get on WhatsApp. Somebody nagged you to get onto WhatsApp. Somebody told you to get onto Gmail. None of these guys actually ever did an advertising campaign. And at the core of it, the reason why somebody told you, the reason why every one of these brands was actually marketed by unknowing, unpaid evangelists, and each of them was, and that's the secret to any brand becoming great going forward, is that at the core of it, there's something remark-worthy. There's something remark-worthy about each of those products. Zara knows that it gets talked about because they change the inventory every 2 weeks. You get really frustrated when you go third time and you don't find a Zara product out there. Every one of these brands has something about it carefully crafted, not by accident. Every single guy figured out what is this one thing that really delighted you, and not just delighted you to such an extent that you couldn't stop talking about it to somebody else. To me, that somewhere in that truth is a truth to all future product hits, at least in this next few years before something changes again. So that to me has actually become big. So I almost use that as a mantra. Remark-worthy is what you're doing. When somebody comes to me and says, hey, this is my product, this is my plan, this is my business, what is it I can do to be remark-worthy? Is it remark-worthy enough? Are people going to, tell you? The test is somebody in a bar going to tell somebody else, you got to read that book. That's how J.K. Rowling's, that's how Harry Potter went. There was no big advertising campaign. Kids just told each other, you got to read this book, right? It was entirely driven by word of mouth. So getting that word of mouth is really about being remark-worthy. And to me, that defines your life. That defines everything you do.
I must tell you, I've been listening to Mahesh, and the one thing that strikes me from everything that he has said is that one of the best ways of becoming a bestseller is by being a bestseller.
So I started thinking about saying, okay, I found maybe some secret of, a startup. This is how you get a great first product. This is how you become big. And I've actually applied them in my business. But I said, what happens next? How do you build a large company? How do large companies behave? How do people behave in their careers if this remark-worthiness is really the secret? Look at companies today. Once upon a time, Unilever had the biggest brands in the world. Today, Unilever itself and its brands are not in the top 100 biggest brands in the world. The biggest brand in the world is Apple. The second biggest brand in the world is Google, right? What did Apple do, or what did Google do? Here's really what's interesting. Google started and said, okay, I'm going to do search. It won search. And it said, you know what, now I'm going to do email. No connection with search. It went and won email. After email, it said, I'm going to do maps. No connection with search, no connection with email. It went and won maps. So essentially what Google is doing is, if the old way of saying, I'm here, my next step will be here, my next step will be here. Google saying, this is where I am, I've won. I'll throw the seed far away, let it germinate there. I get 80% market there. That's where I'm going to be next. That's where I'm going to be somewhere else, right? And you'll see big companies tend to do that. In effect, the key point is to never actually stay close to what you're doing. To go far away, reinvent yourself. It's about reinventing yourself to get that 80-90% dominant market share in some new place. And I think that's really not just a business challenge, a brand challenge, but also it's a life challenge. That's how you have to live your life. It's not about one career for 35 years, but a succession of careers where you create dominance and go do something else and go do something else. To me, that's really what, long-term great success is probably going to be all about.